And without any further ado, I do want to introduce Shawn Bryant, my friend Shawn, who is a director and principal consultant with YesToECE, as formerly Teaching Excellence Center, and early childhood education training, coaching, and consultancy. A nationally recognized professional development facilitator, Shawn brings 29 years of experience, expertise, and commitment to advancing the work of adults involved in the lives of young children. In addition to his work to YesToECE, Shawn is lead coach consultant for the state of Pennsylvania Office of Child Development and Early Learning Infant and Toddler Coaching Program. He supports coaches throughout the state and is program administrator with Yale University Center for Child Development and Social Policy. He trains and facilitates the use of CHILD, Child Tool, for early childhood mental health consultants across the country. Shawn is contributing author of the Trauma Responsive Family Engagement for Early Childhood Practices for Equity and Resilience that just is hot off the presses. Looking for my copy. I can't find it at the moment, but it's an awesome book. I think everybody should get one. Hopefully there'll be an opportunity to have a live training and have him sign some books. So that would be awesome. Shawn has taught preschool, college, early childhood mental health consultation, leads to countywide early childhood program, provided training and technical assistance for state universal pre-K programs. And he's my friend and your friend and all of our friends, because he is so knowledgeable and has such graciously gives his information and his knowledge and support. Shawn, thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you, Beth. That was great. Thank you so much. And Beth, this is not goodbye. This is just see you later, on the journey. This is not goodbye. You will be receiving texts from me until you say, Shawn, you're getting on my nerves. So good morning, everyone. I'm happy that you all were able to make it. I see so many familiar names and some unfamiliar names. I see Lorna and Sybil, and I see Aninye, I see Marjorie and Imelda, my good friend Imelda. Wow, so many people. I see Wendy and Carrie, and I see LaRue. So welcome. I think this is a Crystal Lewis I know, but it may not be. And I just see so many other names that I can't see a face, so I'm not sure who it maybe. So welcome, welcome, welcome. As Beth said, I am Shawn Bryant. I'm going to be your facilitator. Oh, I see Dana Cox. There she is, Dana Cox. I'm going to be your facilitator on this learning journey. I won't go over a lot of what's on the screen, but this is just what I like to share with people so that you get a little bit of not just my background, but how I see the work of early childhood education, how I view my entry points for child and family services, and what's been guiding me going on in a few more months. It'll be 30 years that I've been on this ever-changing, ever-challenging, ever-rewarding journey called service to our youngest citizens and their families. So thank you all for taking the time out of your productive days to spend some time to elevate. And this is a two-part session. And I will say that we have some great door prizes, but we're not giving any of them away until tomorrow. So you've got to come back for part two. We know how we are. If we did them today, then folk won't show up tomorrow. And tomorrow is really, we designed it in a way where we said, come to both, because today is really going to be foundational. And then tomorrow we're going to get into risk and strategies, like things that we need to do, where today we're really going to look at what knowledge do we show up with, where are our gaps, some self-assessing ourselves, and really just hearing what is this notion of sexuality development from a developmentally appropriate lens, so that we lay this strong foundation that we can build on tomorrow. So, which is why it's a two-part, so that we're not rushing the information, and that we're able to grapple with the complexity of it for some folk. And for others, it'll just be, oh, this all makes sense. Oh, I never thought about that. I can add this to my practice, or how I work with children, or how I work with adults or children and families. So we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for part two. So this is a virtual learning process where we're going to raise awareness about sexuality development in young children. We're going to learn some new skills, and you're even going to practice some skills. And most of those skills are what I like to call having brave conversations, being able to respond and not react when these things happen. And we're going to have one little scenario today, and then we're going to do some tomorrow also. So no matter where you are, be prepared to have a little scenario building with one or two other people. And as always, have a pencil or paper handy, a marker, crayon, dry erase, chalk, whatever is your fancy, whatever you write with, because there's going to be some times when you'll need to write some things down. And of course, as always, this is going to be recorded. Leah's usually really great about having them up on the First Five website. And then the handouts will be up there also. So you don't have to worry about not getting the slide deck. You all will receive the slide deck for today and tomorrow, along with some other handouts. And as always, I've jumped forward and created community agreements for ourselves. We want you to speak, have questions, have reflections, considering your role and responsibility, in this notion of being open to new ways of learning and knowing, and really focusing on, like, what's my just one thing? What's my job? What am I taking back to my role and responsibility to do something different as it pertains to this very important topic? In addition, I've created some broad expectations for us. I want you to always take care of your personal needs first. I want us to make sure we're respectful of each other, and we want to speak up but not over. This topic, oftentimes, we all pivot somewhere across that continuum. So you may hear someone who unmutes and they say something that, you just disagree with, or it just goes against your values. And I want us to understand all of these pieces as broad expectations for our learning together. So our objectives for today's session is we're going to define sexuality development in young children.
Are you leaving?
I unmuted her. I muted that person, Leah. Then we're going to develop an understanding of what sexual development is for young children. And then we're going to be able to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy sexual development. I prefer those terms, healthy and unhealthy, to the word normal, but a lot of times in the literature, it's still written as normal. And there is a slide where I use the word normal, but I put it in quotes. So I just want to front load for everyone. This notion of normal and not normal is language that we really want to contend with. And I'm speaking to it now, but I left it in there intentionally to speak to it later. And we really want to understand what are the tenets and the pieces of healthy development for young children, specifically healthy sexual development, which actually falls under the domain of health. So if we consider our state standards in California, if we consider our foundations and frameworks, when we get to the health pieces, this falls under there in terms of it being the domain of growth, learning, and development that we often skip over for ourselves and young children. So that's a big, big piece that I want everybody to think about, this healthy versus unhealthy. So I just want to set the tone. I found this quote that I just love. And it says, we learn by teaching. And the quote says that it's a Latin proverb. We learn by teaching. And this really resonates deeply with me, because this notion of that if I can teach a child about healthy sexual development that's developmentally appropriate, that each time I do that and move forward, I'm learning as the adult. I'm building more capacity. I'm gaining more experience. I'm making my foundation stronger so that I can anticipate it. I know what to do, because it's going to continue to happen over and over and over again. And on tomorrow, we're going to talk more about risk and licensing in those pieces of this notion of healthy sexuality development for young children. All right, so I'm going to stop talking for just a minute. I want to hear from people. I want some folk to unmute themselves, tell us your name, where you work, and a question or thought that you have around sexual development. Some of you who may be at work and you can't speak, go ahead and type yours in the chat box. But I want to hear from at least 3 or 4 people who will unmute themselves, and I'll give you a moment to think about it, and then I'm going to start calling some people's names. Go ahead, Sybil. You can be first. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
All right. Hello, everyone. I teach for Stockton Unified School District 6, so I appreciate you all inviting me in. I'm the program director of my own site for preschool, ages 3 to 5. And my big question is, when can we start teaching the gender differences and a lot of the new information that we're learning right now? No more boy and girl line, no more gender specification, things of that nature. That's what I want to come away from this training with.
Okay, so great question, Sybil. And I want to be really, really mindful and clear that we're talking about healthy sexual development in 2 parts. And wow, under that umbrella, when we start talking about gender, what we've done is we've collapsed 2 topics on top of each other. So I want to just be really clear that this training is not about gender, but when we start talking about sexual development, what you're going to hear is actually how children learn about sexual development in the context of being with us, regardless of identified gender or gender that was assigned to them at birth. So there are some pieces there, but I want to be really, really careful that we don't collapse them on top of each other. So thank you for opening up with that question, because that's a really great consideration that probably many people are thinking about also. Inye, go ahead.
Oh, my name is Inye. I work at the, you got it right. I work at the Las Positas College Child Development Center. And what I want to come away with from this training, or my thoughts about, is the best way to handle questions that the little ones ask, the tiny ones ask, concerning actually parts of their body, and how to best communicate that to them in a way they'll understand.
We'll definitely be able to give you some strategies for that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, Nicole says, I just want to prevent child abuse as best as I can. Awesome. So Dr. Nicole Brown, no, that was Nicole Bodine. Dr. Nicole Brown says, I work at the library administration to learn everything I can so I can evaluate the books offered. We're going to talk about books tomorrow, Dr. Brown. Definitely, definitely. Because some of these books aren't worth the paper that they're printed on. And then there are others that are of higher quality. And then sometimes what we've got to do is create our own books, or what we call scripted stories for children as an alternative, so that we're providing children with the best of the best when it comes to this topic. Definitely, definitely. And I'm going to show you a kind of brand new book by an author that her books have been banned over the years, and then others in other fields always look to her as the seminal resource. So we're definitely going to talk about that, Dr. Brown. Thank you for the question. Imelda, go ahead.
Thank you, Shawn. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you, Shawn.
Same here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I don't have a question. I have a thought. When I saw the title for this presentation, it's almost like I had to do a double take, because we focus so much on early childhood development, kinder readiness, but this specific topic, unfortunately, I realized not on my radar. So scary in a sense, but so grateful that we're here, and that it's the beginning of including it in our curriculum, in our program, in our thinking as well. So I just extending my gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you for that thought. Awesome. Lorna Knight from Cadango. Hey, Lorna.
Hey, good seeing you. Good. I'm here with everyone. My thoughts are that, it seems like in the spring, children discover themselves. They start to notice what they have and what others don't have, and all those kinds of bathroom situations. But and then the teachers panic. There's a big uproar, and so we've addressed it when it comes up, but I'm thinking that we need to put something in place. That conversation needs to be had way before children get curious, and what things can we put in place? Talking with the adults before those situations. So I'd love to
Definitely.
hear something about that. That's what I'm seeking, more the adult piece than the children.
And this, we're going to have some of that in there for you, Lorna. Thank you for
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Awesome, awesome. I'm looking at all these things in the chat here. So Rochelle said, how to make parents comfortable with this development. Definitely parents, teachers, caregivers, I would say most adults involved in the lives of young children. Angelica says, how to answer correctly when guiding and educating parents. So here's this thing that we know. When we frame it around, the parent is the person that doesn't want to pivot or shift, always remind yourself when that happens, because it's going to happen to you throughout your career. That's not about them, that's about me. So if you turned it towards you and said, so let's say they come back tomorrow with the same way of thinking, the same question, the same response. How do I pivot and shift around sharing information, around listening to them, around validating, which doesn't mean agreement. And oftentimes we think when we're validating a parent's perspective, we're agreeing with them, but they are not the same thing. And oftentimes we invalidate, so the disagreement grows. And for many folk, this takes time, it takes effort. And when we think about programs that service young children and their families, what we often do is we never send home notices around, this is what we're doing with math, this is what we're doing with literacy, this is what we're doing when we get outside for physical development. But then the moment we talk about this, we send a letter home. So we've already made it different instead of situating it under health as a domain of learning. So that's the first frame there our policies and program has to take around, this is how we situate this around learning. And if we're sending a note home around, this is what we're going to be responding to because it's coming up, we should be doing the same thing with language and literacy and phonics and math. We are now doing geometry. We were doing one-to-one correspondence. We do none of that for the most part. Now, I'm not saying that no one does, but I've been doing this work a long time. And for the most part, we don't communicate that. We communicate it if they show up and ask a question, but in this formalized way, it's when we talk about this topic that we end up doing it. Instead of letting parents know that these things come up and they are healthy parts of development. And if something that's unhealthy surfaces, we will respond to it the same way we do everything else. And we're building our capacity and their capacity when we're having these conversations that I like to say have no end, but we're going to get more into strategies and some clear developmentally appropriate things that we can do. All right, so Beth, I'm missing some of them in the chat when I start talking, so I'm scrolling back up. And if I miss one you think I need to catch back, please remind me.
Will do.
All right, I got Dr. Brown's development environment change. So Kathy says, how to support children as they grow. The environments are different when we were young, definitely. Theon says how to support special needs children to deal with sexual exploration. We're going to talk about that in particular, because that is something that we need to pay attention to when we have children with different developmental needs that we're supposed to be caring for, because they become some of the most vulnerable children that we actually don't pay attention to for some biases around children with unique needs. So how to encourage parents to discuss healthy sexual development. Thank you, Angelica. So Marjorie says, work with caregivers, sexual abuse trauma. That was a big one. They're sometimes healthy to children. How do we help them in their responses? Yeah, that's going to be a big one, Marjorie. And most adults do show up with their own histories that sometimes they share and sometimes they don't share. And what we find is it's really through those experiences of building the relationships that, and once the trust is there, then we can do some more things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but not dive really, really deep into it. I hear what you said, your own reactions of discomfort to children's sexuality, which is a big piece of why when Lorna was talking, she said, everyone says, oh my God, this happened. What we're really doing is we're reacting to our own discomfort to it. So Rochelle says, how to navigate the conversations around developmentally appropriate sexual behavior with parents when the children begin to explore with each child and ask questions. So when we get to the point, we're going to get there in just a moment, where we're going to talk about infants and toddlers, preschoolers, and school agers. I'm going to drop some things right there for you, Rochelle. Thank you. So Jess says, how to distinguish between healthy development and reactions to trauma and abuse. Best ways to guide and educate. We're going to cover some of that. And that's going to be that's literally in one of the handouts that everyone's going to get from Leah when she uploads the video and she puts the link there that literally has some clear delineations between the healthy, the unhealthy, and things that I call red flags that we need to respond to and not react to. Sandy, this exploration and terminology, really great foundational piece that, I'm going to share a story about my own godson who is now 10. And when he was 3 and 4 in Head Start, something had happened to him around this, but what he was able to do as a result of having correct terminology. How to answer correctly when guiding and educating parents. What are the age and terms to use to teach children personal body parts? Great question, Nadine. We're going to cover that. That's one of my favorite ones because we actually invalidate it. We teach head, shoulders, knees, and toes. There's a lot of body between that, and we never name it. So we're saying head, shoulders, knees, and toes. We literally skip all the torso and everything in that area, and then we don't name it. And when we name it, cute, funny names that just don't even make sense. And then we don't realize that the research says when we do that, we put children at a disadvantage and we put them in dangerous situations because they don't even have the language for what has happened or what they experienced. And we're going to get to that. That's a huge piece around keeping kids safe. Beth?
Yeah, just lots of great questions that it looks to me like all the stuff you'll be covering. It's really exciting. I'm happy about that. Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you, Beth. Awesome. Definitely, Dana. All right, I'm going to move forward. And at any point, if you need clarification as we're moving forward, you all know, please, stop me. So we're going to do some self-assessment in 3 areas, and we call this the Sexuality Perception Survey. So you're going to answer about 3 to 4 questions under comfort level, knowledge base, and communication. So we're doing this will be pre and post, meaning we're doing it today, and then we're going to come back to this tomorrow to see if there's been any shift once we've, elevated with some new information. So Leah's going to put 3 polls up on the screen. The first poll is going to be about comfort level, and there are 5 questions that you'll answer in the poll around comfort level. You should see the poll up now. So it looks like, whoa, we're split in half. For number 1, comfort level, 47% of you said you agree. 47% of you said, no, I'm looking at that wrong. 51% of you said you agree. 15% of you said you disagree, and 34% of you said not sure. So that was 24 people said they agreed, 7 people said they disagreed, and 16 said they're not sure. So we have a lot of learners here. That's great. I'm comfortable around children who are curious and playful with their body. 23 of you said agree, 6 of you said nope, 18 of you said you're not sure. Number 3, I feel comfortable talking to children about healthy sexual behaviors and supporting sexual development. 15 of you said yeah, 10 of you said nope, and 22 of you said not sure. I view sexual activities like masturbating by children as being uncomfortable and viewed as problematic. 7 of you said yes, 26 of you said nope, so you have an understanding of masturbation in young children. Awesome. And then 14 of you said you're not sure, you just came to learn. That's totally all right. And I'm comfortable in using correct anatomical labels when talking to children about their bodies. 37 of you said yes, 4 of you said disagree, and 6 of you said not sure. Comfort level. All right. I'm going to stop sharing, Leah. So let's get to the next section in our poll around knowledge base. Knowledge base is the next section. So under our knowledge base, this group says, I believe a great deal of specific research has been done in children's sexual curiosity and behaviors. 14 people said they agree, 16 said they disagree, and 22 said they're not sure. I'm really loving the not sures. I feel empowered to respond to sexual behaviors in a meaningfully relevant fashion. 23 of us said yeah, 10 of us said nope, and 19 of us said, I don't know. Number 3 is it's important for childcare professionals to be knowledgeable of healthy sexual development in young children. Wow, 51 out of 52 people said they agree. That says 98% of you believe that. 0 people said they disagree, and 1 person said they were not sure. That one flew off the charts, Beth and Leah. I
Yes,
believe
it did.
I would just be curious to find out why. I believe, but that really is saying that the folk here believe that teachers and providers should have a knowledge base around this, that they're in full agreement around that, except for 1 person. So cool. I believe early childhood teachers need to include information about healthy sexuality development in their curriculum. 42 out of 52 people said yeah. 1 out of 52 said they disagree, and 9 people said they're not sure. So the vast majority of us believe that this should be in our curriculum. That is really great to hear. Our next question said, I know the difference between child abuse and healthy development. 31 of you said yeah, 6 of you said nope, and 15 of you said you're not quite sure. All right, we're going to give you some clear information to move forward there. Then we said, I believe masturbation is normal for young children. 37 of you said yeah, 2 of you said no, and 13 people said, I'm not sure at all. Then our final question under knowledge base says, I believe children's play should be limited by gender. Boys play with trucks, girls play with dolls. 1 of you said you agree. 50 out of the 52 people said they disagree, and 1 person said they weren't sure. All right, this is definitely the Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm so happy that people shared their answers. It's just great. It's great to see this.
It is. Leah, our final one on communication. Communication. There are only 3 questions here. All right, so we said, I believe sex education is only the parent's role. 2 people said they agree. 43 people said they disagree, and 3 people said they're not sure. I'm loving this, Beth. They're on board. This is going to be an easy group. They're going to drink the Kool-Aid with us, Beth. I love it.
I think they're highly advanced.
Yeah. I often tell people I'm not in South Carolina right now. I've been working with some wonderful people in South Carolina, and sometimes I say things that are indicative of being in the Bay Area, and then they all this is the clear indication I'm not in the Bay Area. They say, Mr. Bryant, what do you mean by that? And because they call me Mr. Bryant, it's always like a red flag in my brain that nobody's calling me Shawn the way everyone in the Bay Area calls me. So it's just a friendly reminder that regionally, we do see these things differently sometimes. Number 2 says, I support issues surrounding sex education in schools. 35 of us said, yeah. 1 person said they disagree, and 12 people said they're just not sure. And our final question, I believe parents and families often speak to teachers about their child's sexual behaviors. 7 out of the 48 people said no. 30 out of the 48 people said no. 7 out of the 48 people said they agree. 30 out of the 48 people said they disagree. And 11 of us said we're not sure at all. Wow. Thank you all for that. This has been so good to see where the group is. And we're going to come back to this tomorrow to see if there's been any shift in terms of us having this short PD. So Dr. Nicole Brown put an emoji. What's that emoji, Dr. Brown? Is that a tear or water? I can't figure out what it is.
That's laughing so hard you crying and sweating emoji.
Oh, okay.
You know, saying you're not in South Carolina anymore. I'm like, no, welcome home, man. Welcome home.
Right. Definitely not in South Carolina, right? They're wonderful people, though. Wonderful people. All right. So hold on to, these questions. If you were able to download it and go back to it and kind of reflect on it, you could do it again later, print it out. Hold on to the handout. And of course, if you didn't, it's going to be there when Leah sends the link with all the handouts that you're going to receive in this session. So we're going to jump in. All right. So this notion of sexual development, it happens early. It begins early in life. Guess where it begins? Who can take a guess? Put your answer in the chat or unmute and tell us. Who can tell us where it begins? Where does sexual development begin? Actually, I want you to pinpoint on a continuum. So Theon says birth. Okay, so we got one vote. Diane said birth. Anyone else? You want to take it? You want to take us? You can unmute or you can type it in the chat. Anina says birth. Veronica says at home and birth. I like that, Veronica, at home and birth. Any more people want to take a stab at this? A guess at it? Imelda said yes, birth.
In that movie, Look Who's Talking, the kid discovered his penis like in the womb.
And Dana just put it there. That's right. At conception. It is at conception. And if we were together, I was pivoting, and Leah, I had told Leah, I'm going to have them do this great activity. So if we were together at First Five, what I usually do is I have on the wall, and I can take a picture of it and show you as a handout. And we put like before birth, at birth, 2 to 3 years, and we literally go up until the elder years. And it's across the wall. And then I give everybody 3 kind of handouts. They're laminated, and you have to like read the statement and decide where it goes. So I'm going to tell you all the answer. So people usually put stuff all over, and most of it goes to the older ages. And then I start talking about it, and I usually have people help me, and they're moving it. I'm saying, move that one here, move that one here. And this whole shift from the right side of the wall to the left side. And then when people stand back, everyone usually takes a deep breath, because what they realize is everything got moved to before 2 years of age. And then we have to like take a deep breath, reflect on it, and talk about it, that it's at conception that sexual development begins with our language. If we find out after 12 weeks, because there's usually around 12 weeks when they can say, oh, those gonads went up, this fetus will become female. Those gonads went down, this fetus will become male. And then sometimes they hover in the middle. And that's what Sybil was, wanting to talk more about, but this session isn't that. And if we went down that road, we would only confuse people. That's a whole nother training that First Five has offered at different levels. And that we can dive deep into if you identify it as a need on the evaluation, which is why Beth is always saying, write down what you want to learn. But this notion that sexual development starts early, it starts at conception when we start saying, are you having a girl or a boy? Because when we say that, we automatically assign some behaviors to what I think you need to do as a potential parent and how I'm seeing your unborn child already. That's literally when it happens. That's literally when it happens. And even those of us who are in the know still struggle with it. So I'm not sure if I shared it with this group, but so I'm the oldest grandchild. And then my first cousin, who's the youngest, we're really, really close. And I think it's because I see her as she's young enough to be my child. She's in her early 20s, but we're really close. So she gave birth last Monday, MOK. And through the magic of technology, they would only let her husband in the hospital. So her mother and her father were at their house, sitting on the sofa on FaceTime. Her older sister was at her house with her other kids. She has a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and now, so she had a child every, 2 years. And then I was there, and like the magic of technology, I was able to see her give birth. And it wasn't as exciting as I thought it was gonna be. I thought she was gonna be screaming and hollering. She kind of took a deep breath, and then I heard the baby crying. I was like, where was the drama? So television really messed me up, because there was literally, she was lying down, and I said, Leah, why don't you like stand up and let gravity help? And Nick came, her husband, and he lifted her up in the bed, and she was on her knees. And literally 2 minutes later, the baby was there. And it was like no drama. All I heard was like this deep breath. But this notion of like sexual development, they found out what the gender was last year. They had a gender reveal party. And because her sisters all have 1 daughter and 2 sons, I thought she already had a daughter. She needed another son to make it equal. And when they found out that she was having a girl, she broke that chain. Guess who had a tantrum? Me. I had an adult tantrum. I got up and walked out because I had somewhat fundamental expectations around what I wanted the gender to be and who this child was going to be in our lives. That was ridiculous. I'm sharing with you a true story. It was ridiculous, but that's how it happens. I had this frame that I wanted to continue that's just unrealistic and ridiculous. And we all have them. And then they become our biases, and that becomes the lens through which we see and expect parents to parent children certain ways, and the way we expect children to show up and actualize in life, because it all begins before birth at conception. And then we socialize them in certain ways around who we think they need to be based on the agenda that's assigned to them. And then based on the emotional and physical pieces that we attach to them to how we socialize children. They're internalizing all of this around who they think they need to be. Some of this is encouraging and some of it is actually dangerous for young children, because what we tell children as early as possible is sometimes your body does not belong to you, your body belongs to me. And if they can't ever shake that, we end up with teenagers and young adults who really have never felt ownership of their own bodies, i.e. sexual development that started early on. The other big piece that I really need us to understand is that sexual development, just like other domains of learning, is a developmental continuum, and it sits right there with all the other domains of learning. So the more we understand that there's a natural progression, that ages and stages take place, and that different things are happening, and children are paying attention and first and foremost, learning with their bodies. So we start with infants and toddlers who learn about sexual development through their bodies. This notion of physical contact. We know that all infants learn through their bodies primarily in terms of development. But when we think of sexual development, we're sending messages as adults. Many of you have probably done this. I don't want you to feel bad, but this is that other message. You changing the infant's or toddler's diaper, and as soon as you pull the diaper off, their hand goes right to their genitals. And then what you see the adult do, they move the hand and shake their head no. We start sending that message early and often that that is what, not okay. Imagine doing that for 3 years of someone's life who every time you take their diaper off, their hand just goes there because it's what? It's a healthy response to having the diaper, which actually is not normal, removed. And then we start sending a message to that infant, no, 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 don't do that, no, no, no. And then we actually hold their hand. I ran an infant toddler center in San Francisco. I ran an early Head Start program in San Mateo. I've seen it happen hundreds of times. Those are the foundational pieces of when we send the message, because we don't understand that that interaction has a teaching component attached to it. And we think, oh, the baby doesn't know, the baby's too young. That's not what the research is telling us. So as they become aware of what their body and you, those messages sometimes what? Go together like a hand in glove, or sometimes they don't fit well together. And then what we do is we force this notion of touch, exploration, which is all developmentally appropriate around that infant or that toddler's body, as wrong, as not okay, as something that they shouldn't do. We're sending messages, we're teaching as caregivers, as parents, as grandparents, as people who claim to love and care for young children. It happens in infancy. And oftentimes it happens around diaper changing. So our friends at Creative Curriculum Teachstone, they basically had said years ago that typical infants will have their diaper changed about 60,000 times, particularly the ones in care, because we're supposed to be on those schedules where we're constantly changing their diaper. That's a lot of opportunities to interact. 60,000 times, and I've been alive for only less than 700 days. That's a lot of contact when you think about it. So imagine out of those 60,000 times, let's just say 40 of them, 40,000 out of the 60,000 times, an adult shakes their head at me and says no every time they remove my diaper because of where my hand goes. Imagine getting that message for the first 2 years of your life and how that's ingrained foundationally into who we become as preschoolers, not even as an adult, but as a preschooler around body awareness, in this notion of who am I as a male-born child, who am I as a female-born child, and they're telling me, which is what Sybil was getting at, that this is my assigned gender. But you know what, as I begin to explore, come to understand and know, I have some disagreement there. Now this training isn't going to unpack that part, but this notion of sexuality development starts there. It starts there. So let's jump to our preschoolers. So it looks like Mo from Seneca Center put a question in the chat. I'm going to try to read it real quick. Okay, I read it, Mo, but I didn't see the question there. Looked like you were making more of a statement. No worries. No worries. I thought it was so long, so I thought it was a question. So in terms of our sense of preschoolers, here's where they really become curious, because they've already taken notice as an infant and toddler and become aware of similarities and differences. So what really becomes cemented is, who am I in this social circle? Who am I in this Head Start program? Who am I in this kindergarten classroom? Who am I in this house with 2 other children? All of those things begin to take place. Then we know that it's actually a very natural occurrence for children to begin to explore their own bodies and sometimes the bodies of their peers, because that's who they spend most of their time with. And sometimes those peers are their siblings or their cousins when they're around them the most. So we know that this is really a normal occurrence for many children, not all, but for many. And then parents will often say, well, my daughter and her cousin, you know, were in her bedroom and they're both 5 and they had pulled their pants down and then they jump to, does that mean my daughter is going to become a lesbian? So I used to say, that doesn't mean that. Now my response is, we don't know. But in the midst of that, how can you affirm who your daughter is? How can you affirm that your daughter feels loved and cared for despite the circumstance and situation? So over the years, my response has changed. I would always go to, how do I make this parent or this teacher feel good, and say no, when the truth is, we don't know. But we do know there are some things that we can do regardless of who they become later, meaning tomorrow or 4 years from now or 20 years from now. There's some things that we can plant to give them a secure base. And that's the appropriate conversation that we should be having, because it's not about my values. Because the moment I say no, what I've done is I've switched the conversation to a values-based conversation in terms of them believing that I'm aligned with them, and I may not be. And that was really out of fear. 20 years ago, that was out of fear and me not knowing how to even hold the conversation, which is what I saw most of you were saying. We have to build that capacity. What begins to emerge is this sense of privacy. They want to shut the door, they want to dress themselves. Many families, young children are put in the bath together so that the adult can wash all 2 of them or all 3 of them if they're a year or 2 apart. And then children as early as 3 or 4 or 5 begin to say, I want to be in the bathtub by myself, for no reason other than they develop this sense of privacy, and it begins to emerge. And sometimes if they really want the privacy and it's not allowed, it becomes uncomfortable for them. It becomes uncomfortable for them. I see it in preschool classrooms and in toddler classrooms all the time. When toddlers would learn to potty, and we would usually have 2, 3, 4 toilets in the area and the changing table, some of the children would just sit on the toilet and pull their pants down and have a conversation with the other child. Other children would be really apprehensive to doing it. And a lot of it was what they had learned from the adults in their lives around, this is something that is done always in private. This is something that is, what we call healthy and normal, or this is something that we don't talk about or don't even have language for. All of that begins to emerge and has a direct effect on what? Their attitudes and their beliefs about themselves and sexual development. It's all formed there, which is why I'm so happy that all of you said, yeah, this should be a part of the curriculum, because when it becomes a part of the core curriculum, so Lauren is there saying, okay, this thing keeps happening. So as she grapples with these 5 points and how do we embed it into our policy and make it practice in a developmentally appropriate way, what immediately begins to happen is it shifts the attitudes of the adults and the children. So here's what I often get. But that attitude shift, Shawn, is going to mean children are going to run around wanting to kiss and hug and hump each other. That's not what it means at all. That's not what it means at all. Many of you drive cars. Many of your cars can go 100 miles an hour. Many of you have never driven your car past 55 miles an hour. Just because you purchased a car and it goes 100 miles an hour doesn't mean you're going to do it. What we actually find is giving children accurate and correct information doesn't force them to do the opposite. It actually helps to ground them and anchor them in all of these things, which is what we should be teaching and affording them. And because early childhood is really from conception to age 8, or for most children, 3rd grade, we need to consider our school agers. And this is really where that whole advent of my body and birthing and babies kind of takes a whole different route from preschoolers understanding that. Another difference here, but this is beginning to shift because more and more 2-year-olds grow up with tablets and phones in their hands. And if they don't have adults in their lives who know how to set those blocks and limits so that they only have access to child-directed media, this is where media influences take hold, because one child may be able to watch R-rated movies at age 7, and the other child, watches an hour of television a week. But we're in the same classroom and we become friends, same gender, different gender, group of children, those media influence show up. And then children begin to learn oftentimes incorrect information about themselves and their body, which is why it becomes our responsibility to make sure we're talking to children early and often about it. And don't do, so my eldest nephew is 18, graduated from high school last year. And he's 18, I want to say he was 12 or 13. And my brother called me one time and was like, I was in, my whole family's in the Philadelphia area. He called me and he said, oh my God, I don't think I can deal with this. So I got all nervous on the phone and I said, what happened? He said, this boy asked me, what was Oreo sex? And I was like, what? And he was like, and he wouldn't tell me what he meant. So I had to make him repeat it. He said, he asked me, what is Oreo sex? And it still didn't. So I was thinking, okay, you mean like he's asking you if a white person and a black person have sex? And then my brother bust out laughing and he was like, no. And I was like, well, this is what you're telling me. And he was like, listen to what I'm saying. And then it took the 3rd time when my nephew he heard somebody and didn't know what it meant. The kids in his school were talking about oral sex. So what he heard sounded like Oreo, and he asked his dad, and my brother says, I don't think I can deal with this. And I'm thinking, you have 3 sons. So your oldest one, who has influence over the other 2, he was like, I'm just not ready for this. So of course, as an uncle, I leaned in and said, put him on the phone. I talked to him and I said, I'm going to send you this book. It's called All About Our Bodies. And I wrote a little note in it. And, I mailed in the book. My brother was like, he's reading that book every day. He's reading that book more than he's reading his schoolwork. And I said, well, you got to go talk to him also because he may have some questions. And the interesting part was, and this is how children are individuals and peer influences are different. Him and his younger brother, they're only 10 months apart. So you would think everything is going to be similar. The oldest one read the book from cover to cover. The one that was 10 months younger had no interest in it because their isolated experiences around peer influences were different. And what we actually will hear from school-age children are things around jokes and language that they may hear from adults where they're trying to figure out, like my nephew was trying to figure out something that he couldn't make sense of because he was listening to someone and didn't know what that was. And in doing that around how we respond to the inappropriateness of the jokes and the language, that to children become their peer conversations that they really try to normalize. If we don't respond, then we say this is okay, meaning the disrespect and the intolerance. So our response to the conversation builds their tolerance and their respect around this emerging topic as a school ager around sexual development. Really, really important for us to show up there. Really, really important. Okay, I'm gonna, it looks like the chat box moved a minute, so I'm gonna look over here. So someone said, my grandkids that have autism, not potty trained yet, 4 years, constantly do it, and they just want to explore themselves. That message was sent, it was a direct message to me. Then someone says, it's true, I have one that don't use it till they get home. They won't use the bathroom at school, they use the bathroom at home to do a number 2. And then Myrna Hardy says, oh my God, yes. I'm not sure what you were saying, oh my God, yes to Myrna, so you may need to unmute and share that with me. So, and then, so all the books are on the book list that you're going to get tomorrow. I'm holding them all because I'm manipulating you all to come back for part 2. I'm doing it intentionally because if I gave everybody everything today, people won't come back and then they'll run with it. And I want you all to experience the full capacity of what's being presented, which is why we made this a part 2 training. And every time we do part 2s, we got to talk about it because the numbers shift from part 1 to part 2. But all of those handouts will be provided to you. Not to worry, not to worry.
So this is Myrna. So the only thing I was saying, oh my God, yes to, was when you were talking about those isolated incidents and how it could be one way for one child and a different way for another child. Because I personally have one of my own kids who's my youngest, but he is the most curious, and every day I feel like he comes home with something new that he heard from someone else that he's asking me about. I mean, I had to have that talk when he was 5, and I have to say I was more uncomfortable than I think he was.
Yeah, children are waiting for us to help them make sense of what they're noticing. They're waiting for us to help them have the right language. They're waiting for us to help them put the pieces together. And when we don't do that, then what we're doing is saying, you figure it out all by yourself. And then I think that's when it becomes really, really dangerous. All right, while you were talking, I actually went to try to find Robbie Harris's book. So her name is Robbie Harris, R-O-B-I-E-H Harris. If you go to Amazon and type her name in, all of these wonderful books come up. She's been on the banned book list across the country, probably over the last 2 decades, because she's trying to put the right, accurate information out there in ways for parents and teachers to contend with and use this information. So Robbie H. Harris is her name, and but all the books are on the book list, so not to worry, you'll get that also. So now we're going to move into this notion of 3 areas for understanding sexual behavior. So many of you were bringing this up earlier. So the 3 areas, I like our stoplights. So the green areas mean thumbs up. These are developmentally appropriate. There's some yellow areas that are going to be the areas of concern, and then red areas or behaviors. And those red ones are what we call red flags. Okay, so let's start with the green areas. So we see here, I remember I told you I put the word normal sexual development, but you should replace that. And I'm putting it there intentionally so that we can have a brief conversation around it, so that when the word normal comes up, you really should be using more positive language, more sexual development, positive language around healthy sexual development. So really the replacement of the word normal with the word healthy is where we should be. And I put it there just to have the conversation. So we know that for young children, it's oftentimes spontaneous. They didn't think about it. It's not premeditated. It's curious. And they're easily distracted. They'll move from that to something different. That we usually see them involved in play with children of what we call an equal or that same age, size, and ability. So when that's different, and Dana and someone else brought this up, thank you, Beth. When that's different, there's some areas of concern or areas of red flags. But it usually happens, and this is sexual play behavior in the context of normal play. These behaviors are often children gathering and balancing their curiosity with other aspects of life. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in a way that people usually have to take a breath, because it's something we often don't afford young children. But it's one of the main ways they end up being sexually abused, unfortunately. And then it's our job to make sure we provide multiple opportunities for this notion of positive feedback and information. And that's going to look different for everybody. So my brother knew I need to call my brother. And he called me and he was acting like he couldn't resource. And I stepped in and said, I'm doing this, which is what he wanted me to do. And he was like, great. And then I kept saying, well, there still has to be like 20 more conversations. So don't wait. Have those conversations early and often, and make sure that they're repeated. And of course, we talked about how to do that in multiple ways. So when it comes to developmentally appropriate sexual behaviors, I just want to talk to you around like children who are birth to 5. Some of this is as simple as thumb sucking or body stroking or even holding their genitals. You take my diaper off, my hand goes to my genitals. It's normal. Then the curiosity piece, sometimes I might want to touch another child's genitals. I may ask and start asking questions about breast and bottoms and genitals, in and out of the bathtub. You may see us playing games in preschool like doctor and nurse, pull your shirt up, pull your pants down. And these are usually the things that I'm sure Lorna's program is dealing with, and all the others who are on here, Sybil, who run early childhood programs. So I'm jumping ahead because we're going to have this conversation tomorrow. Anytime these things happen, and you report them to licensing is never going to blame a child or children. They're going to say, you had a supervision lapse, you need a plan. That is always going to be their response. When you say, oh, the children, this kid, when they were playing behind the tree and they pulled their pants down, they're going to say, okay, because they understand this slide. They're going to say, where were the adults? So let's be clear. They're not going to say, oh, this 3-year-old, we need to kick them out. He needs to go to juvie right now. That's never going to be their response. And sometimes I've seen programs call them thinking, licensing didn't do anything. What were they supposed to do? He's 3, he's 4. So they see it from that lens. Now, I got many issues with licensing, but here's one of the pieces where we stand in solidarity. They are never blaming children here. They are saying the adults were not supervising, which is why this happened. There's no way around that. And we're going to talk about that more tomorrow, but I just want to be clear about that part. The other part that's really normal, children can enjoy being nude. So I actually have 2 friends of mine who live in San Francisco, and I took it out of this presentation because it's virtual and we're recording it, but they gave me consent years ago. Their sons were in the living room and they were both nude, and somehow they had the lids to the pots, and they put them on their backsides, and their mom took a picture. And Lisa let me, she said I could use the picture in the training because you can't see their faces. And she teaches law at Stanford, and her husband was running for mayor of San Francisco. So these are some learned people, but they gave consent and permission, but I took it out of the slide here just because we're recording it. And I don't want people to be too jarred from that. Whereas in person, we can have a different conversation, but this enjoyment of being nude. I have another friend whose son is now 10. And when he was 3 and 4, her and her husband was saying, he's always taking all of his clothes off in the bedroom. Then he's coming out here with us in the living room. And they were so frustrated by it. So we had to have these conversations around, he's exploring and he's learning. And it really seems like he's getting a charge from both of you that when he does it, he could see both of you went from 0 to 10. That's a clear way to come out my bedroom. You're telling me to get in the bed. I'm going to take all my clothes off because now one of you have to get up and come in the room with me. He's clearly learned that as a 4-year-old. I don't think it's so much about him enjoying being nude as he's figured out, I can get you to respond to me in a different way. And the other part that's normal for birth to 5 is they have a huge interest in their body parts and their functions, And then the handout, because you all were asking about the handouts, I've broken it up for 5 to 9-year-olds, and I've even went up to 9 to 12-year-olds. I'm not going to cover all of that right now, but in the handout, you get to see, because you may have some 4-year-olds and you'll say, whoa, this 4-year-old has a lot of 5 to 9-year-old behaviors. That's something to look at. Or for those of you who work with school agers, you may have a 7-year-old who's demonstrating some of what we call 9 to 12-year-old behaviors. Just important to understand them, but know that development is across a continuum. It's never in a fixed box. I'm gonna speed up a little bit here, Beth. So this other notion of understanding behaviors is concern behaviors, what I call the yellow behaviors. Here's when the behavior is frequent and persistent. And then we sometimes see a difference in developmental abilities. So I'm 4, but I function like a 6-year-old. Jack is 4, but he functions like a 2.5-year-old. Jack actually has an IEP with 4 IEP goals. So developmentally, we are really different. And what we know is that children there could easily get manipulated and things happen to them, because oftentimes we're not using right language with them. We're leaving them out thinking they're not ready, but they're socializing with their peers, and their peers, because they're really great social agents, pick up on Jack's a little bit different than us. Nobody names it, and then Jack could get easily manipulated. An area of concern to watch. We need to watch for the type of behavior that we're seeing around this notion of healthy and unhealthy. How often in the duration? Is this happening every day? Did we see some like bathroom potty things happening for 2 weeks and then they went away? Or did it persist from November, December, and January? Something else is going on. And for particular children, if you know this is different or unusual for Shawn, but Mikey always acts this way and Heather always performs this way, we need to pay attention to that as we're gathering information to assess. And we're going to talk tomorrow more about how to accurately gather information, identify and taking those appropriate next steps. So for this concern area for birth to 5 specifically, you may have some children birth to 5 who have a preoccupation with adult sexual type behavior. Some things that you may see children, and as a mental health consultant, providing services in Alameda County, I've had providers and teachers say, yesterday when you weren't here, we had to stop them. They were over here doing X, Y, and Z. Definitely some adult things that we need to be concerned about. And I've heard, stories from anywhere from children pressing play on the VHS and the wrong thing was in the VHS to them turning the station on the cable because they know how to work it, to them opening up the laptop, or to them standing in the hallway and watching their parents or their older sibling engage in sexual activity and them not know they were there. So this is why it's an area of concern, not necessarily a red flag, because it could have been a one-time incident. This notion of children who are aggressive, they may walk up and pull someone else's clothes down or up against their will. This is an area of concern. Young children who have explicit sexual conversations, using what I like to call sophisticated adult language. Then you may notice that they have some potential preoccupation with wanting to touch another child's genitals. So my godson was in Head Start in Alameda County, and his parents had given, and his funny part is his mother's, at the time, she was a lactation specialist, and his father works for the post office. So I happened to be there, and he was telling her he needed to go to the bathroom as he was moving, past, he was potty trained, but he couldn't get into the bathroom without their help. So he was saying, I needed to use the bathroom, but he didn't say I need to go to the bathroom. They had given him a nickname for his penis. So I was sitting there and I was like, what's happening? And then Tiffany kind of said, oh, he needs to use the bathroom. So I let them go to the bathroom. And then when they came back, I said, Tiffany and John, like, you realize that's not the name. Like, we need to teach him that that's his penis. He need to be okay with saying penis, and you need to be okay with hearing penis. Because we're friends and they respect me, we agreed we were going to teach him this language actively. Guess what happened? 2 months later, he comes home and he says, Mom, when I was in the bathroom, I'm just making up a name, Joshua asked me if he could touch my penis. So then she says, what did you say? And he said, I said no. Perfect. That's what we want to happen. Imagine if they had never taught him that, and Joshua said, can I touch your penis? He wouldn't have known what he was talking about. He may have said, okay, go ahead. So she ended up calling me really happy. Like, it worked. And those of us in early childhood, when people who aren't in early childhood do that, in our heads we're thinking, I know it worked. I know what I'm doing. Of course, I didn't say that to her, but she was really happy. Like, we've been teaching him this, and he came back and said that it worked. Then this third area, these are the red flags. These are the red flags that we need to consider. Here, it's excessive. It's happening nonstop in front of adults, around adults. Children have no kind of respect of person. It could be really secretive, where children are always asking children to come behind the slide, come over here, let's wait, come back over here. Compulsive or coercive, a child saying no, and they're telling them, I'm not going to be your friend if you don't do it. These are all red flags. And then this notion of age, development, and power. So the big one here is when we consider those three things, if there are big differences. So if we have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, that's a big age difference. A 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, that's not a big age difference. We need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention to development, that you could have, like I said, 2 4-year-olds who are at different places on the developmental continuum. It's easy for me to get manipulated if I'm at the lower end even though we're in the same classroom and you think, oh, they're all 4-year-olds, pay attention to my development. I'm not taking it in the way that other child is. And notions of power. In terms of birth to 5, children form cliques because they see us doing it. And the children with all the power, it becomes easy for them to coerce children into doing other things. That's our job to pay attention to if that's happening and when it's happening. And then this notion of the nature of the activity and how it occurred. Is it really sophisticated, or did this seem clumsy and didn't even make sense? But we need to pay attention to it. And then we're moving because we see these as clear needs for us to do what? Respond and not react. And we call that response and intervention and action. And so for birth to 5, of course, this is what? Sexual behavior and play, or it could be really explicit foreplay for young children. Persistent masturbation, meaning this child could just be standing in line to walk outside and it happens. Persistent, we define persistent as what? Occurring repeatedly for at least 4 weeks. Occurring repeatedly for at least 4 weeks. So that's a month. So I come to school every day in January, and it's 21 school days, and you see me doing this same sexual behavior every day. That's then a persistent behavior, okay? But we need to document it, because you may see me do it in December 3 times, I do it no more, and then you see me do it 2 times in January. And if I internalize it wrong, because I've had an impression, I'm going to say, Shawn's always touching himself, he's always masturbating. No, you actually saw me do it 5 times in 2 months. That's not persistent, but my emotional response, I could communicate back to what Beth, if she's my mental health consultant and my director, he does it all the time. So oftentimes we've got to have this conversation to pull it back, or bring another adult in who might say, he didn't do it every day. He did do it 3 times in December, and we both agreed he did it 2 times here in January. But if that teacher's response is different because she hasn't internalized it or doesn't have that level of impression or emotional response, the response is going to be different. But we're paying attention to red flag behaviors. And of course, this notion of attempting to touch the genitals of adults, sexual behavior between young children that could involve some penetration with an object. And these are big. So I actually have an early Head Start program that I visit in person in the pandemic. And it's just one toddler from day 1 who had never seen me before and always wanted to give me a hug. So I literally started teaching the boundaries in front of the toddler teachers, where the other kids would kind of look and stand off, which is what they were supposed to do. Then as I became familiar with them, they learned my name, they would say hi. But this little kid, every time I would come in, would just run and grab me and want me to hug. And I would say, you have to ask Shawn for a hug. So I would say, ask me for a hug. I might not want a hug right now. You just persistent with it around trying to teach the notion of boundaries as a visitor, because the teachers didn't have the capacity to intervene, but they saw it as problematic, but not knowing what should we do other than say, no, come back. So to me, that was a red flag sign that I said, okay, this has happened multiple times. Now I'm talking to the director of education and the executive director, something's going on here. This should not be happening to me when I show up. And then this notion of red flags are when children, similar age or older age or even younger age, force other children to engage in sexual play in terms of birth to 5. Those are really big pieces that are red flags that we need to address immediately. And now for those of you who are in early learning settings, it is never your responsibility to investigate and diagnose. That is never our role and responsibility. It is our responsibility to observe, to actively observe, to keep children safe, because we have an ethical responsibility to that. But then we have a responsibility to then refer for someone else to say, this is what's going on. This child has been sexually abused. This child, that is not our job to perform that labeling and that diagnosis. So let's be really clear about that. That's someone else's job. And we have clear people who that's their role and responsibility. That's what they do every day. But what we can do in helping them do that is we're gathering the information if we see the red flag behavior showing up for children who have pivoted to the other side of the sexual development continuum. All right, we're almost there. I told you this was the foundational part. And then tomorrow, it's going to be a lot more active. Review and reinforce. So we realize that sexual development for young children is what on a developmental continuum. It's developmental like language, like math, like physical development, like all domains of learning. This falls under health, and it is a domain that we should teach. The second big piece that I want to review with you as a takeaway is that appropriate behaviors from young children deserve and mandate an appropriate response from us. That means healthy sexual development, this slide, demands a healthy response from us that's developmentally appropriate. All right. So what we want to be clear on is children who show up here are getting one response, and children who show up here are getting something different, and children who show up here are getting something completely different. What we find is here, and here, same response for all behaviors. So then they're clearly one that is developmentally appropriate, one that we need to watch and is of concern, and one that is literally just beeping that horn at us. My response cannot be the same for all of those. They shouldn't be. One is a developmentally appropriate teaching response, reinforcing expectations. The other is, I need to actually have a side conversation. And this notion of telling parents, involving other players, we're going to continue to watch. And the other is we've seen this persistent and repeated. We need a plan of action to move forward. Really different responses. This one doesn't require a plan of action. This requires teachers to pay attention, to validate young children's exploration in healthy ways. This one says, I'm watching, I may engage in some conversation, some languaging, some language lifts around appropriate language, some boundaries sometimes. And this one is clearly, I need other adults to come. I have some data because we need something different to happen. So those are the differences between that yellow, that green, and those red behaviors that require different responses from us. All right, so we're almost there. Then we're going to end with some fun. So what is this sexuality in young children? So what is sexuality in young children? So sexuality in young children is integral to their identity because it forms who they believe they are, their capacities and capabilities, or if it's done in an unhealthy way, the identity that they develop is, I'm not a good person, I'm not worthy. I almost was going to say what I said to my cousin one time, but I won't say it here. But the identity begins to be formed around negative capacities and capabilities. And this notion of our sexuality development, it's a lifespan, just like temperament. We did temperament last week, which has a lifelong influence. Sexuality doesn't go away because I'm 65 or because I'm 70. The same way it shows up as a 2-year-old who places their hand on their genitals when they're 2, or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old who actually enjoys masturbating. Here's the part that's difficult for most adults. For the majority of children, masturbation feels good. So because it feels good, and if we haven't labeled and named and talked to children about their bodies and who their bodies belong to, that notion of it feeling good when someone else does it in an abusive way, the child is oftentimes responding to something that might feel good, but is awful and horrible. That's one way that we push children down that path, by not talking to them about it and giving them accurate language to describe what has happened to them. That's literally the conversation I had with my godkids' parents. And it wasn't out of fear, but they got it like, oh, we need to do this because it's going to help him. And we actually know, and someone put 30% in the chat earlier, that one of the main ways to guard children, young children, from sexual abuse is by helping them to identify the correct terminology to their body parts as a number one thing, so that when it happens, they're not saying, oh, my ting ting, my poo poo. No, they're saying, it happened, they touched my penis, they touched my butt, they touched my navel, whatever it was, they touched my vagina, they touched my vulva, whatever it was, they're using the accurate medical terminology to describe it. And that becomes what? An agent for children to be able to talk about those experiences to prevent them from happening. And we know that. We know that. It's this person said they read something that said 30%. The one that I read actually said 45%. Almost half of children when they can describe their body parts and label them, they're anatomically correct, that's been the guard against them being victims to sexual abuse, which is why my godson was able to come home and say, this happened today. 2 months prior, he did not know what the word penis meant. He didn't, because they had given him a nickname his whole life for that. And then they switched and started teaching him. And 2 months later in school, his peer asked to see his penis, and he was able to say no because he knew what he was talking about. So there's another point to consider here. Our sexuality is influenced in healthy and unhealthy ways by our experiences. These are all domains of learning here, all domains of learning. Then this other part that's sad, our political and economical factors. That really means what my family values and believes. That could be religion. You know, it could be some things around ethnicity, race, our tribe, our clan. We may have some fundamental differences, as Mo put in the chat earlier, around Western versus non-Western ways, access and availability to economic supports or not economic supports, and what some families turn their eyes to and what some families don't turn their eyes away from. All of these are the influences that send a message to children around their sexuality, who their bodies belong to, who has access to them, and who doesn't have access to them. So years ago, I used to work for, I don't know how I did it. I was working during the day, and I would like do these after school things for women organized against rape. We called it WAR in Philadelphia. And my job was really to go around as an educator and teach children safer ways of identifying. And we would actually teach them this song that my private zones are between my knees and my nose where my bathing suit goes. And the song was this little jingle. And I remember like people would catch on to it really quick. And one day it hit me. So we're talking about this private zone area, but we're never labeling what any of those parts that my bathing suit covers are. And that's when that red light went off for me, like, we're doing a disservice because we're bringing this thing to awareness, but then we're not naming, if I take my bathing suit off, what are the names to these pieces that I keep covered, opposed to just talking about safe and unsafe touch. I mean, we were able to move from like good and bad touch to safe and unsafe, which made more sense to children because this notion of good and bad, remember, you're saying this is bad that this person is touching me this way, but it feels good. I'm 6. I'm really confused now. See the problem there with good and bad opposed to safe and not safe? They're fundamentally different for young children around one being concrete and the other being very abstract and highly individualized. But all of these are the influences around how sexuality development emerges in young children's lives, how it elevates, or actually how it could actually turn into really awful and bad situations. So we're almost done. And then we're going to finish strong for tomorrow. So what we see here is that when we consider sexual development, the expression of sexual development happens in multiple ways. Earlier, we talked about when we looked at infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and school agers. For school agers, so much of it was what we call bathroom talk. For infants, it's oftentimes through touching and exploring, and sometimes that's for preschoolers or even school-age children. This touching and exploration oftentimes go together. Sometimes it's my own body. Sometimes it could be someone else's body as I'm beginning to understand boundaries and what the boundaries are between my body and someone else's. And if no one explains it to me in a healthy way, I actually don't really know that. And this notion of sexual activity, children often want to do things like this through games and fun. Remember we said when it's lighthearted and fun, and children can jump to that and go right to doing something different, they're just exploring. But when they're thinking deeply about it, trying to hide and be secretive, that's a different expression of it. And largely our interactions. Children are always patterning themselves after their role models. So yeah, their role models are their parents and families, but their role models are their teachers, they're the social workers, they're the family advocates, they're the bus drivers, they're the mail people, that every adult involved in their life are sending a message through interactions, both strong and weak, about how they can express themselves related to sexual development. And this is usually where the rubber hits the road for us, because we get it and we say, this makes sense. But then here's the problem. We don't take any action to change it. We don't take any action to change it. And what it requires is for us to take action to change it on our part, not on their part, not telling them don't do that, but us doing something different. Because if I do some things different around language, if I do some things different around helping them understand touch and exploration, if I do some things different around the appropriate types of games to play, if I do something different around consent and getting someone's permission, then all of their interactions are elevated in healthy ways. So here's what it looks like. So instead of me saying, you know, little Shawn, your teacher told me that you were touching yourself today. Don't do that ever again. I sent a clear message. But if I say, yeah, your teacher called me and said that, you know, yesterday and today, you were masturbating, you were touching yourself. I don't know if you remember, but remember when we read that book and then we had a conversation, there's some appropriate places we should do that. Do you remember what those places were? Let me say, you said my room, and where else? I don't remember. Yeah, your room is one. That's definitely where you could touch yourself in privacy. Where's the other one? The bathroom, because you're in the bathroom by yourself. Those are the two places that, so we validate and affirm in this way by not saying this is bad, this is wrong, but as the parent, as the teacher, it requires me some elevation and to deal with my own mess, or as Erica Badu would say, bag lady, you're gonna hurt your back. Like, we got to deal with the baggage that we're bringing around this topic to do something different. So if we don't deal with our baggage, we're going to show up the same way with that first response, opposed to my second response, which means I've done the deeper work and engaged in the language that I need to use, that it's clear, it's precise, and it's elevating at the same time around expectation, not rule, not demand, but expectation. And that takes some pivoting to get there. It takes some values reevaluating, because most of us have picked up on these things from our own families, from our parents, our caregivers, our teachers, important people in our lives who, I'll just go ahead and say it, probably didn't have all the best understandings of sexual development for themselves, whether or not if they had one child or 10, it was just a different understanding. So as we've grown to understand sexual development, our knowledge around what we should be giving children has grown. So in 2022, it looks really different than it did in 1962. So we can't use a 1962 frame for moving that forward. So Myrna says, should we actually say masturbate to a child if it's not just touch, if it's just touch? Well, that's the term for it, that it doesn't always look one way. So I think a lot of us as adults, we have an adult frame for when we hear the word masturbate, of what if an adult does it. But you could have a 3-year-old who's lying down on their mat, humping the mat. They're masturbating. You could have someone else who's sitting on the sofa watching a cartoon and rubbing their legs together. They're masturbating. You may have another child who's simply touching themselves. Giving the child the accurate language only guards them and it helps them. So you may want to say, oh, you know, a lot of people use the word masturbating, and then here we're just going to say between daddy and you, we're going to say touch ourselves, but they mean the same thing. Now you might want to do that if that's where your comfort level is, but there is power. I don't know another better word to use. There's power to naming what it is, and that even masturbation for young children is across a continuum, and it does not look the way it looks for an adult, largely because of puberty. They haven't gotten to that point where adults are. So if an adult is masturbating, that's a different act compared to a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old. If this was the longer session, I sometimes show in utero, we have evidence of male fetuses who have full-blown erections. That's evidence that this notion of sexual development is happening even in utero. And we can assume the same thing is happening for what female-born children, it just doesn't look the same way. So all of that is an expression of sexual development, that a parent says, oh, okay, or a parent says, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. That literally has an effect on how they're going to arm or disarm their child around sexual development in 2022, where all you have to do is cut on any type of media and you're going to see an aspect of sexual development in your face. Even if you're looking at Nickelodeon Kids, it shows up there. I've watched it. Even if you're on YouTube for kids, there's some things there that I had to question and rear back. So if we're not talking to the children about it in rich ways as a safe base, we're saying learn from them and learn it inaccurately. So thank you for that question, Myrna. That was great. So this notion of expressing sexuality, we're about to stop here. We're about to stop here and we'll pick up tomorrow with risk and some clear strategies that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. And we're going to get into some books and some strategies. So one of the things I want you to reflect on today is this notion of expressing sexuality as a fundamental right that all children have. And that's a conversation I have with parents and families. Make sure you have some really good food at that parent workshop to ease their troubles around this notion of expressing sexuality as a fundamental right. As a fundamental right. Dr. Brown has a question. Are you saying masturbate literally means touching your genitals, but it doesn't have to be a sexual release connected unto puberty? Sorry for the bad spelling. Yes, and Dr. Brown, yes. I think based on the way the question was posed to me around not using the word masturbate, but using the word touch, it was really as a response to that. But for young children in the developmentally appropriate context, this notion of touching oneself, because here's the piece. So if we're talking about that, we're really saying when you touch yourself or when you masturbate, you're touching your penis, little Johnny, or you're touching your vulva, little Maria. Like we've got to be clear about that, because when we say touch ourselves, and then if something happens, and then I say, you touched yourself? And the child says, yeah. Then I say, show me where. And they don't move or give you any feedback. And this happens with young children all the time. What if that child has the language and the parent has said, oh, you know what, Miss Beth, that therapist, little Shawn was masturbating and he was at school. And then the therapist says, oh, so then my son responds, oh yeah, I was. It's not an expression of anything, because I can touch myself on the arm, I can touch myself on the ear, I can touch myself on the nose. So particularly for children with disabilities, that does not become helpful for them. They need real language to describe a specific thing. Isn't that right, Dana? So and that's us. That's us. And I think it's real. You all are bringing up some real important pieces. We hold the ambiguity of using touching oneself because it sounds and feels better to us, some of us, opposed to if I use that other word, an adult frame comes into our mind. So we've got to do the work. That's the real work. We've got to do the work to work on affirming language. And when we affirm language, language is the catalyst for having brave conversations. It is. I do it all the time. When I have my like anti-bias, anti-racist in early childhood sessions with people that I've named Brave Conversations as a tool, what they really leave with is, oh, the more that I can use this language and have these conversations, I arm myself and the children. We have the same experience around sexual development. If the more we arm ourselves as the adults with the accurate language, because some of you have been to the doctor, and I don't even want you to tell me what it is. You've been to the doctor and you couldn't describe to the doctor what was happening for you because of your lack of wanting to use that word in that language. As a full-grown, expressed adult, you could not tell your doctor what was going on for you. I know it happens. I have two friends that are doctors, and we have this conversation all the time. And then my one friend who works in Syracuse says, I always tell them, just write it down then. If you can't say it to me, or type a message on your cell phone. Like doctors have had to pivot with grown adults who can't say this is what has happening to my body, particularly if it's around what? Something related to their genitals or sexuality, because they were never what? Given the language in an affirmative way. So Vanessa says, so wait a minute, someone says autistic children. Who said that? Oh, that was Dr. Brown. She says, cause touching yourself is too general for, yeah. Thank you for clarifying, because touching your penis is more clear than touching yourself, because we can touch myself anywhere. So Vanessa says, I'm thinking how children can be concrete. So the importance of naming, and that's a developmental piece, that we move from the concrete to the abstract. We don't show up in the abstract. It needs to be concrete, and we build on that to gain capacity. That's just a developmental necessity. So there's other way that children express themselves can increase their vulnerability and cause harm. Again, I go back to my godson. Had he not had the language, that could have turned into a harmful situation for a generally a shy little boy who would often have one or two little friends in the Head Start classroom. He wasn't the kid that, 8 of the children wanted to play with him every day. So there was some vulnerability there. So had he not had this affirmed language to go back home and say, guess what happened today, mom? Because mom and dad talked to him about it while she was cooking dinner. And that's usually how it happens. And then of course she stopped cooking and called me on the phone. But we want to prevent, and that's that do no harm, children from becoming vulnerable because we didn't take action on our part. And some of that is just picking 4 words that we need to use when we're talking to children, and being okay with it. So I was a consultant in a program right before the pandemic in Oakland. And one of the teachers had an emergency. So I was in the room with the other teacher, and 2 of the children went in the bathroom, and I kind of stood at the door, and they both got on the toilet. One was male and one was female. He did his business and he got up, and then she did her business, and she was having a difficult time. And I literally was standing at the door talking to this 4-year-old saying, I can't wipe your bottom for you. You're gonna have to use more toilet paper. Keep wiping. And then she just got up. I saw her mother and said she was in the bathroom. I did not go help her. She's probably going to have something in her underwear. But I'm straight to the point, because I don't want her daughter to go home and say, well, when I was in the bathroom, Mr. Shawn was there. That's ambiguous. That's it. Now her mother's going to have questions when she comes back tomorrow. I'm clear. I was standing at the door. The camera could see me. I was giving her language instructions. I could see she didn't follow through. This is taking action. And for me, that was simple. I know some other men in early childhood, they would have said, can you come from this room? And I want to go to the other room. They want no parts of it because they're so wrapped with fear around what most of the women in the field will say, because we haven't really resourced them that this is everybody's responsibility to help children and to help ourselves, which is how we end up helping children. So we were going to end with a little breakout room, but I'm paying attention to the time. So I'm going to give this one, I'm going to add it to tomorrow's. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to end with reading you a little story today from this old book called Belly Buttons Are Navels. Belly Buttons Are Navels. So this is a story about Bella and her brother Jasper. One day, while they were taking a bath, Jasper said, I have 2 eyes. So do I. And what do you think this is? Asked Bella. I guess it's a nose, laughed Jasper. And look, we both have 2 ears, he added. I only have 1 mouth, said Bella. Jasper thought for a moment and added, me too. I guess that's all we get. But look, so the funny part, I'm laughing at the inside, because the cat, they never talk about the cat. The cat is like doing the most in every picture. The cat's almost in the tub. So, but look, I have 2 arms. I do too, replied Bella. And see my fingers? I can wiggle my fingers too, bragged Jasper. I have 2 nipples, and you have them too. Of course, everyone has them. Now, how many of us have actually labeled those as nipples? Nobody. Not the children. Remember, we do head, shoulders, knees, and toes. The rest is just your body. It's just your body. And belly buttons too, said Bella. You mean navels, added Jasper. Well, I guess, she replied, but here's this point of contention. Jasper says what? Belly buttons. No, Bella says belly buttons and Jasper says navels. So they have two different words for the same part of the body. That's a conversation that needs to be had, that some of us say belly buttons and some of us say navels, but they mean the same thing. That's this piece right here on our tummy. Oftentimes that requires an adult to help children make sense of you're talking about the same thing. I have a vulva. Only girls have vulvas. Now watch out. How many of us would rip this page from the book or skip it? You know how when those of you who are preschool teachers, if something you didn't know how to explain, you didn't want a child to answer it, you just skip past that page and almost get glued to the other page. I've done that once or twice. Well, I have a penis and only boys have penises, said Jasper. And of course, this book is old, of course, so it's using the binaries of male and female because that's where most people start. And that's a safe place for people to start. What's that thing under your penis, asked Bella. A scrotum. That's what, answered Jasper. How many of you have ever talked to your little son, your nephew, your little boy, and used that word scrotum? Probably nobody on the call. And inside it are two round testicles. Somebody's been talking to Jasper about his body. Jasper is informed. He might know more than his teacher. Oh, well, I have a clitoris just inside my vulva, right above the opening of my vagina. That's what I have, said Bella. Again, I'm sure this is this page that folk have skipped in this children's book. Half of the people on the call are probably red. I just can't see your faces to know that you've turned red and purple from the language in this children's book. But we both have buttocks, said Jasper. Buttocks, questioned Bella. Your rear end, replied Jasper, to sit on. See how the conversation is playful, exploratory, and curious? Oh, you mean where the anus is, replied Bella. Yeah, and we both have one of them too, right? Between the buttocks. And we both have legs to stand on and run with, Jasper pointed out. And feet at the end of our legs, said Bella. Feet to walk and run with. I have feet too, and look, I can wiggle my toes just like I wiggle my fingers, added Jasper. Hey, so can I, said Bella proudly. We have lots of parts. Everyone in the world has them, and I'm glad we know the right names. The end, the end. And this is a very old book. Tomorrow I'm gonna share with you some more current books. And this is just one structure. And this book actually came with a video. So I don't show the video anymore because it's really old and grainy. And it's like their grandmothers giving Jasper and Bella a bath. And they're real children and they're in the bath and she's talking to them and labeling all those parts. So I stopped showing the video just because it's so old. And it's kind of creepy because they're in this black room. And I'm like, who takes a bath in a black bathroom? But you can see they're in the studio and they're trying to like morph everything else out. I totally get what they were trying to do. I keep saying I'm gonna ask my cousin to re-record it with her 2- and 4-year-old. I'm sure if I asked her, she'll do it. But the story conveys the message that I want us to get around. Here's an expectation. Now for all of us, it won't show up this way if you created your own scripted story for children in your house. It may show up very differently. You may use some different language. You may not have children who are completely nude. You may pivot around how you're doing this. Belly buttons are navels, Myrna. Belly buttons are navels is the title of this book. But you're gonna tomorrow we're gonna get some more updated ones that take a different stab at this topic. So Rochelle says, I lost volume on my device for the last 10 minutes. I'm going to log off. See you tomorrow. No worries, no worries. So hopefully when you can watch it, if you lost volume, you can go back and watch the recording when Leah uploads it to YouTube. All right, so we're almost there. It's 2:50, it's 11:53. So I close all my sessions during the pandemic just as a reminder that families are home working, not working from home. And that Lillian Katz, who's now in her 90s, years ago, when I was first entering into the field almost 30 years ago, she made 7 distinctions between being a parent and the family and the teacher. She reminded us that what happens in school, the teacher's responsible in thinking about 24 children, but it's really appropriate for that parent to think about their one child, in that they're not always interchangeable. And I think some of that stress we unknowingly added to families by wanting their homes to function the way our schools function. And I just want to remind us that they're different, they should look different and feel different. And we want to encourage that throughout the remainder of this global pandemic. So thank you for your time and attention for part 1. Looking forward to part 2 tomorrow. Feel free to connect with me online, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and Pinterest, all at YesToECE. Would love to see you there. Some exciting new things are coming starting in February. A lot more content will be published. So we'd love to see you there in the social media atmosphere. All right, so we have like 6 more minutes. We can take some questions now if you all want to, or for those who need to go, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you for listening and being an active group. Tomorrow you won't hear from me so much. We'll hear more from you all on how to drill down with the learning into strategies after we cover like risk, specifically risk, and then how to respond to the risk. All right, Leah, it looks like nobody has any questions. So looks like we'll see everyone tomorrow.
Great. Thanks so much, Shawn. And thanks so much, everyone, for coming
in there.